Awesome. Okay, welcome to session 2 of the Embodied Healing for Colonial Inherited Trauma, which I've been shorthanding as Decolonial Healing. And I'm really excited to be back for our second week. And today we're going to be talking about the practice of resourcing. And to give a bit of context of the topic. Essentially, I was just talking to Celine, our coordinator today, and was talking about how, I'm in a season of my life where I've done a lot of deep healing in the last year, really going inward to look at how trauma is showing up in my body, how to meet it, and creating the capacity in my life through daily practices and routines that has allowed me to have enough resource and capacity to meet an intense emotion or a momentum of a trauma response. And so I know we haven't really done too much as far as like talking about what trauma looks like in the body. And the reason why we haven't done that is because what I've noticed is sometimes when we go straight to the imprint, which is trauma, it can often feel really activating for the nervous system. So the reason why we've started with, last week with the context and this week with resourcing is to create that wide base of support, that stability that's really needed in order to meet trauma. And so what I'll be sharing here today is really where I started in terms of my trauma healing journey. And we'll talk a little bit as well as what are the blocks to the practice of really taking care of ourselves in these small and doable ways that amount to and build into a larger, wider base for support, so that when we get triggered by or activated rather, then by something that someone did, or any form of activation, we can meet it instead of going out of our window of presence or tolerance, which can sometimes put us in a spiral. And so that's the context for today. And we'll go ahead and start with our grounding practice, which I think we could really use. So we'll just begin by first softening into our seat and maybe just allowing for yourself to get comfortable, maybe just shifting around and saying, okay, letting your body know, I can get comfortable here. I don't need to hold on to my own body weight. Maybe some amount, any amount of release can happen into the support that's beneath you. And once you feel comfortable, you're invited to look around your space, and you're likely very familiar with your surroundings. And today the invitation is for you to perhaps name a few objects that you're seeing. So for example, I see an essential oil spray. I see my wallet. And I'm naming as well the colors. And I'm also noticing the depth of space between me and these objects. So this really helps us attune with our senses to where we are in time and space. And that allows us to come a little bit more fully into the present moment. If it feels supportive for you, you're invited to deepen your breath. Or maybe instead of deepening it, you just bring some awareness there. Perhaps you notice that even by bringing your awareness to your breath, there's already some form of choice, some form of agency where you get to decide how deep your breath goes. Also notice how your breath just happens in its own. You don't need to tell your body to breathe. And yet, when you turn towards your breath, there is almost like this sense of awareness and choice, just by bringing awareness to this really automatic thing that your body already knows how to do. You're invited now to engage the sense of hearing, perhaps noticing the sound of my voice, maybe any ambient or background noise. And if it's quiet around you, maybe even the quiet vibration of silence. And now I invite you to take a nice deep breath in through the nose. Celine, I think someone popped into the waiting room.
Yeah, did you want me to wait until you were done with the grounding exercise, or should I let them in?
You let them in, yeah. Yeah, take a nice deep breath in. We'll do 2 more like that. Inhale. One more breath. Exhale, let it go. And perhaps now licking your lips or your teeth, noticing anything that you might taste there, if it's pleasant or unpleasant. And last but not least, placing your hand perhaps on a neutral object and noticing what its texture is like. For example, I have my hand on my chair and the texture is it's cloth, but it's kind of rough. It has this friction that I'm noticing when I rub my hand on it. Beautiful. From here, I'd love to invite you to attune to the back of your body. And this can be your upper, mid, or lower back, down towards your sit bones or your bottoms. Just noticing the back body being supported by what you're sitting or laying down on. And see if you can notice the space between your body and the support. Perhaps you notice some warmth there. And as you attune to the space, I wonder if there's anything to notice as you receive this support. And so maybe another way of thinking about it is, what is your relationship to receiving support? It's okay if nothing shows up, or maybe if something does and it doesn't feel good or right. There's no right or wrong way, just awareness. Maybe you notice some freezing or dissociation. That's okay too. Just slowly come back to your physical surroundings, maybe looking around your space once more, or listening to my voice without needing to do anything that I say. Everything is optional. From here, I'd love to invite you to a practice that I'd love for you to consider integrating into maybe your morning practice or your midday, or perhaps before you go to bed. And this practice is called rooting. And essentially it's this practice of imagining these energetic roots that are uniquely yours. So however they appear in your mind's eye, allowing these roots to grow down, down, down from the perineum towards the soil of the earth. Just take a moment to notice what your roots look like, its colors, texture. And let your roots grow deep and down, perhaps through the soil, the dirt. Maybe down through the mycelium network, all the way down through crystalline layers. Perhaps through layers of rock and sediment. Down through gaseous layers, watery layers. All the way down to the fiery core. And maybe as you attune to your roots, really visualizing them growing down, down, down. Perhaps as you come into relationship with Mama Earth, maybe there's a quality of the earth that you feel might reflect in your own body. For example, the earth has these really powerful regenerative qualities. She can take what's no longer needed, what has died, and compost it back to life. She can regenerate herself with this inherent wisdom, this eternal life force that is also within you. And so I wonder, by attuning to this regenerative cycle, this natural capacity to heal, that maybe some part of you, any amount, might feel like that's true for you as well. That somewhere within you, there is an eternal part of yourself that naturally knows how to heal. That there is an inherent treatment plan, a blueprint of health that is guiding you, that is there, and it is possible to attune to and allow for this natural healing plan to unfold in its own timing, in its own way. Beautiful. And now the invitation is for you to let your roots grow wide. So earlier we were going down and deep, but now we let the roots grow wide, taking up space, all 360 degrees of directional growth in your roots. Really allowing your tendrils to go far and wide as they need and want to. And perhaps meeting with the root systems of the trees around you. Maybe even imagining that the roots of my roots and those that are here in the class today and of those watching the recording, the community of the Women's Resource Center, growing and intertwining together, creating this really strong, interconnected root system that can support one another, that every person is sovereign and individual, and we all are interdependent. We all take care of one another. Each person gets to have their unique stories, wisdom, experiences centered, while also centering the lived experiences, stories, and wisdom of others. I wonder if that's possible to attune to. Let's take a few deep breaths here. Wherever you are, you're invited to maybe place a hand, if it feels safe enough, to place a hand on any part of your body that might feel tender or alive. We'll take 3 deep breaths here. Inhale. Exhale, let it go. 2 more on your own. It doesn't have to look like any way. And once you've completed your 3rd exhale, gently open your eyes if they're not already there. Just look around your space once more. perhaps noticing any differences in the quality of your presence, maybe a difference in your energy, how here and now you might feel. And slowly making your way back to the screen when you're ready. Hello, Amanda. Thanks for joining us. And sorry that the link went out late today. Hopefully you were able to join us with ease. And I'll introduce myself since you're new. And we only have about an hour left together, so I might be speaking a little bit fast just in the beginning, but I promise that we'll slow down towards the main portion of the content. So I'm Denise. I identify as a queer Malaysian Chinese cisgendered woman. I am able-bodied, educated, and have access to healthcare. I am an immigrant and I'm currently low income, although I'm working on it. I am an STSU alumni, graduated in 2016. I identify as a psychic empath, a Reiki master, and I also used to read the Akashic Records. And what I mostly focus on now actually is decolonial education and healing, community building, somatic trauma resolution, meaning working at the level of the body to heal trauma, and also healing circle. So this session, this offering is a little bit of everything. I'm also a writer, a podcast host, a mama to a pit bull, a roller skater, ocean lover, and tree whisperer. So I'm here because I'm really passionate about creating spaces, especially for women of color, but not exclusively, to heal, for us to have the really hard to have conversations with capacity and doability. So not needing to rush into something that it's hard. Rather, we start with easy and then we dip into the difficulty and we go back to easy. And by being together, we're creating a new culture that is based on sovereignty, interdependence, integrity, and co-creation. So that's my passion. I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the keepers of the land. I am here on Kumeyaay territory, and that SDSU is also on Kumeyaay territory. We acknowledge that this land has been stolen from Indigenous peoples, and we demand that reparations and the land be returned to those who it has been stolen from. I acknowledge my teachers, Rachel Maddox, Adrienne Marie Brown, Mia Mingus, and many, many more that I don't have time to name. Ancestors of mine, well ancestors who have my highest and best, and your ancestors who may or may not be here to support us in the healing of inherited and colonial trauma. I acknowledge the movement of Black Lives Matter and the lives of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, more recently Jacob Blake, and many, many more who remain named and unnamed who have died at the hands of white supremacy. And I also acknowledge the lives that have been lost due to COVID-19 and the impact that it has systemically, culturally, and socially on our communities. So I'd love to hear if you'd like to introduce yourself, to introduce your name, your pronouns. My pronouns are she, her. I have them in my name. You can rename yourself if you would like to share your pronouns, and pronouns are a way to normalize that some folks don't conform to the gender binary, and it's an extension of our name. So share your name, your pronouns, your location if you want and feel safe and comfortable to share your lineage. I'd love to. And how are you really? So feel free to drop it in the chat. I know I've heard from Daniela last session. So Amanda, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Daniela, feel free to introduce yourself again for Amanda, and I'll wait about a minute or so for you to drop that in the chat. And please also indicate if you would like me to read it out loud. We will be pausing the recording during shares. So right now, I'll pause it. All right. So these are the group agreements that I think will help create the conditions for a little bit more capacity and safety for us to interact with one another. So since it's a small group, I don't foresee anything necessarily happening, but in case it does, we look back to our group agreements. So by being here, you agree to these agreements and these guidelines that help create enough safety for us to be here and to be in this conversation. So the first is self-consent and sovereignty, which means that you got to meet yourself where you are. You do not need permission from me at all to do as you need. So you can opt out of any shares. You don't have to share. You can keep your video turned off. You can turn it on if you want. If you start to share something and you decide that actually it's a little bit too much and you change your mind, you're welcome to do so. And as a reminder, any shares will not be recorded. You're also invited to take up your time, take up space. You are a sovereign being and you get to decide, especially because based on what I've read so far, we do belong to a group of identities that have been marginalized. And so us taking up space is really countercultural to white supremacy and colonialism. So here you get to take up space as much as you want. And you don't have to feel rushed. Even though I know I'm talking a little bit fast right now, I hope that when we come to shares that you allow yourself, if it feels right, to take up space. And if you're sharing and if you feel complete, you can say that I'm complete. This is a judgment-free and brave space, so we're really here to listen to one another and receive each other's lived experiences and shares, and not to respond or give advice. Everything that's shared here is confidential and anonymous, so we won't name anyone's names, and we won't share anything that happened here with any identifying information, and we acknowledge the anonymity of the group. We're in this together, and all parts of you are welcomed here. So no matter what level you are in your healing, know that we want to care for you. And so even if it feels really vulnerable, I invite you to explore sharing that part of yourself, because I can only speak from my experience, but when I share vulnerably with someone who I know can meet me in that vulnerable space, it can be very, very healing. Interdependence and trust is essentially this belief that I have in your sovereignty. I trust in your inherent wisdom and that you're exactly where you need to be in your life right now, in your healing journey. And I'm not here to rush or pressure or dictate or tell you what's right for you. I trust in your inherent wisdom to decide for yourself. And so on that note, we're not here to give advice, although I am offering guidance. So it's your choice to choose to follow my guidance. And if you want advice, but rather it's more like if you want examples or guidance on something that you have a question around, I'm more than happy to offer my experience and whatever wisdom that I have around that. And if I did want to offer something that I think might be really helpful, if you wanted to offer it to somebody else, please ask for consent. So it might feel like, hey, so-and-so, when you said that, I just have something that I think would be really helpful. Is it okay if I offer a reflection, or is it okay if I offer a suggestion that I think might be supportive for you? And what we can do is we can offer love and encouragement through the chat box or body language. If you're on your video, I like to snap my fingers or put a beam up to just say, hey, I see you. Thank you for sharing. Okay. Please take a moment to consider if there's anything else that you need to feel safer in being here. And we'll just wait a moment. And this is going to be our interactive share for today. So I trust that at any time you can and you will, if you need anything, please put it in the chat box. Okay, so I'm curious, do you have a self-care practice? And if yes, what does it look like? What does it feel like for you? And if no, have you considered a self-care practice? And I would also almost add, is there anything that you've noticed might be blocking you from a self-care practice? So please feel free to unmute yourself or put in the chat. I'm going to pause the recording now. Okay, yeah. So these are some beautiful self-care practices. And the reason why I ask is because self-care practices are part of resourcing. And Amanda, earlier I gave the context to why we resource. And essentially, resourcing is a practice that enables us to create the capacity in our day-to-day, well, I have it right here. So let me just show it on the slide. Resourcing is so that we can create a wide base of support, so that we have capacity to meet not only the day-to-day challenges and stressors in our life, like college classes, assignments, finals, all of that, partnerships, relationships, these day-to-day challenges. By resourcing and creating a wide base of support, we'll have more capacity to meet these challenges. And eventually, over time, as these practices become integrated into your daily habits, as you feel more and more alive, as you feel more and more connected to your sense of self through these practices, when the time comes to meet a momentum of a trauma response, so for example, anxiety, or depression, you are much better able to hold its intensity with presence, choice, and clarity. So the idea is that if we have a small window of tolerance, which is a trauma um, uh, theory, this window of presence, right? If anything triggers us, we might pop out of our window and then we end up feeling really disconnected, lack of control, perhaps needing to control. And by resourcing, what we're doing is we're expanding our window of capacity so that when triggers happen, we're not so quickly to one of the other trauma words is like to flip our lid, which is when our cognitive brain goes offline, and our reptilian brain, which is our animal body, which is this sense of needing to survive, kicks in. And so by resourcing, we're creating more capacity so that when triggers do happen, we're better able to meet them. Because the truth is, we're never going to live our lives without triggers. 2020 has definitely taught us that, right? So how do we then create the capacity to meet these intensities without burning out or without putting ourselves in a state of fight or flight or emergency? So resourcing as a self-care practice is like the very basic, beautiful beginning place to start. The next level of resourcing is actually somatic resourcing. And so somatic resourcing is basically feeling resourced at the level of the body on in an internal sense. So for example, when we journal, right, it feels really good for our mind because we're letting all of our thoughts perhaps in our mind onto paper. Or when we do yoga, we feel really good because we're in our bodies and we're moving life force through, we're connecting to perhaps energy centers in our body that help us feel connected to certain areas of our life, right? And so somatic resourcing is taking that and noticing what it feels like inside the body. So sensing for textures, visions, energetic movements, speed, temperatures at the level of the body in relationship to the resource. And what happens is this, when we feel and notice and attune to the sensations of health, it creates a momentum of health, right, within the body to meet, again, any potential momentum of trauma or imprint, because trauma lives at the level of the body in terms of nervous system dynamics and energetics. So when we get activated, it's the body that responds. We feel our heart race. We feel a speed at the level of the body that we need to move quickly. Or if we're feeling on the opposite end, perhaps a little bit more depressed or collapsed, our body is the one that is on the couch and unable to move, right? We feel perhaps a heaviness in the body. And so that's, the momentum of imprint or trauma. And so a momentum of health is what helps us create capacity to meet that trauma. So by attuning to what it's like to be in health and well-being, I'm hoping this makes sense, right? That it can meet the trauma, where sometimes maybe the trauma might be bigger, the momentum is larger and faster. So by creating and attuning and cultivating a momentum of health, when trauma does happen, the health can meet it, right? It's not to say we're bypassing trauma or overriding these instincts. Rather, we have more depth in order to hold that trauma and heal it over time. Let me know in the chat if that makes sense and if you have any questions about this. And we'll do an example in a moment. Great, makes sense? Yeah, awesome. I wonder if for the other folks here, if that makes sense too. Yeah, great. Yeah. And so at the heart of a resourcing practice, what's really beneath this practice of resourcing is knowing and believing that you matter and acting accordingly. Your health matters, your voice matters, your needs, your desires, your well-being matters, right? So when we engage in a resourcing practice, when we engage in our self-care routines, it's cultivating this belief that I matter. What my health, my needs, my well-being matters. And so sometimes I think if we don't have that core belief that we matter, which I've noticed tends to be when it comes to decolonial healing, it tends to be at the heart of that we might not feel as attuned to this feeling of I matter. And so then because we don't believe so, we don't really take the time and channel our energy into resourcing and caring for ourselves. We might just kind of keep pushing and going, and which I'll get to here in a moment. So where's the practice? Okay, I think it's a little bit further down. So I'll do a bit more teaching, and then which works out great because then I can pause the recording just one time. So in terms of rest and well-being, what did you learn or observe or understand about rest and well-being based on what you see or learn from your family members, your family history, family dynamics, or family routines? Please feel free to drop it in the chat. When you think about rest and well-being, perhaps maybe pick one person that you feel closest to in your family. What is their relationship to rest and well-being? Perhaps a caregiver or a parent or an adult in your life that you felt really close to growing up. What was their relationship with rest and well-being? So I'll share. For me, it was my mom. And I actually noticed that my mom, what I observed and what I learned from my mom is that she actually didn't rest very much. She actually worked a lot. And she was an air hostess for Malaysia Airlines. And so she would leave for work sometimes days at a time, which did result in neglect trauma, which I have been healing. But I noticed that whenever even she came back, she wouldn't really rest. She would, go out and like socialize, or she'd take us shopping, or we go do something, which is fun. But I don't really remember seeing my mom rest a lot until she really had to because she was exhausted. And in terms of well-being, we didn't really spend much time taking care of our health unless we were sick or injured. And so it actually resulted in my mom, because she overworked so much, she got ill, and she ended up passing away in 2014 due to multiple illnesses, which I understand, and because I have this knowledge around trauma, is her own unchecked and repressed trauma that manifested as illness. And it's such a practice for myself, because what I learned from my mom was to keep working, keep pushing. And so because of that, that's how I also did. When I went to SDSU, I would constantly just give. And like I would run from one class to the meeting for my extracurricular society, and then rush to the radio station for KCR where I was doing radio shows and then go to another class and then do this and that. And I never really took the time to actually rest my body and care for my health. It was only until I hit rock bottom when I finally needed to process the grief around my mom's death that I went to see the counselor at CPS. But it took me hitting that point of like a breaking point in order for me to take care of myself. And there wasn't this healthy routine of caring for myself. So I'm gonna pause the share here to read. So the reason I ask is because for us folks who have impact, well, really everyone has been impacted by colonization, but I think when we think of trauma in terms of inherited and colonization, colonial trauma, we often, because our generation, we weren't the ones that actually experienced the actual harm that was caused during when colonization was happening on our lands, that maybe our grandparents or great grandparents were, or our parents were, that maybe we might not see it. But the truth is, the impact of trauma often causes us to act and behave and say and think in certain ways. And those behaviors, those mindsets, those patterns are what get passed down. I'm going to say that again. So trauma causes us to act, think, and behave in terms of patterns in a certain way. And it's those patterns, those behaviors, and those mindsets that gets passed down to us, because we learn from our parents, right? They were from the ages of when we were born to up to 7, we're in this really impressionable state where everything that we notice in our surroundings, in our environments, we take in as real. We perceive it as, oh, this is what's acceptable in the world. This is how I'm meant to move and act and think and believe and behave in the world. These are the patterns that my parents are perpetuating. And so it gets impressed into our own bodies and into our own minds. And so that's what gets passed down. And in a very real way as well, the trauma that was not checked, not healed by our great grandparents or our parents, that also gets passed down at the level of the body. So it's epigenetics, right? Like, I've been really working on healing sexual trauma in my life, and I can feel these, like, the trauma in my body. And so even though I have my own trauma, but I'm also healing my maternal lineage where a lot of sexual trauma happened. And so I'm going to pause right there because I realized that I didn't give a content warning, so I'm sorry. Please take care of yourself here. If that means muting me out for a minute to like shake it out, or yeah, please meet yourself where you are. Know that there's a recording and you can come back to this when you feel ready. And so the impact of colonization, and feel free to let me know in the chat if you need anything, is that we may have been conditioned to believe that we don't matter, right? Historically, not only were bodies of color harmed, abused, and manipulated to push the agenda of white capitalist patriarchy, we were also made to serve white bodies, right? How many of us have family members who are maybe servants or coolies or helpers, railroad builders? Our literal bodies were used to push the agenda of capitalist patriarchy and whiteness. And we understand this, right? Capitalism upholds colonialism because it keeps us in a scarcity mindset and conditions us to push our bodies, to override our needs and instincts beyond what our body can actually sustain. And so this pattern of overriding ourselves, our needs and our instincts, of pushing our limits beyond what we're actually capable of, becomes this programming that we're all expected, this grind culture, right? And this scarcity mindset, when with all the advertising and just the propaganda that's shared that there isn't enough for everyone, because there's this belief that there isn't enough, we might keep pushing and grinding in order to feel temporary satisfaction. And so the Nat Ministry is someone that I really love, who talks a lot about rest for resistance. And one of their latest posts talks about like daydreaming as a restful practice. So that's why I mentioned it earlier when one of you shared. And this quote, "You were enough before capitalism lied. You were enough before white supremacy lied. Let us rest and resist together." And I just thought that is so appropriate for what we're talking about today, because it's lies, right? That there isn't enough for everyone, that we have to keep pushing beyond what we can sustain in order to attain something that is temporary, that might not actually satisfy us, but is what we've been taught would satisfy us. And so I'm putting this here to offer you context as to why maybe if self-care and taking care of yourself and resting feels really hard for you, is that it's very likely because of capitalism and what we've observed our parents. Either we like follow them to a T, or we're like complete opposite, right? Because we're like, I saw that didn't work, so I have to do something else. That maybe we get to create our own version of what it means to rest, what it means to meet our needs, what it means to listen to our bodies, and what it means to have wealth and abundance and success. And it doesn't have to look like what we've been sold, what we've been lied to believe. How's this landing for folks? Really curious. Please feel free to drop in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, I'm going to pause the recording once more. And it looks like we have enough time, so I can slow down a bit. Great. Yeah. So where do we even begin, right? Where do we start when it comes to this practice? So we understand now the context of capitalism. And for those of you who are watching the recording, we just talked about how it's really challenging sometimes for folks to understand and look at capitalism in their own life, because it's easier to point over there and say that's capitalism. But when we start to look at our own patterns and our own behaviors, the way we might be perpetuating capitalism, it's a threat to our safety. It's a threat to what we know as safe and normal. And what is safe and normal isn't always healthy or sustainable or truthfully caring for humanity and the earth, right? And so it's really hard for us to expect other people who are not awake to the collective trauma spell. Like those of you who are here are talking about this, y'all are awake to the collective trauma spell. We're not asleep anymore to capitalism and white supremacy. That's why you're here. Yes, please ask a question. Yeah.
Maybe you might have just answered, sorry, you might have just answered it on the slide, but I was like, why do people feel like an anti-oppressive lens is not worth fighting for, focusing on, right? Some people are like, I know that capitalism is oppressive. I know that's why I feel like things are never enough. But I don't have the capacity in this lifetime to ever go against that. So I'm just going to focus on working in it, or like working to be enough, and they don't want, I don't know, it's because of a lack of resources, right? And so like if they had resources, they would. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's I think it's more of like an unconscious choice, because say for example, you know, they become aware of it. They understand that capitalism is oppressive. They understand that it's not sustainable and it's not good for Earth, right, and for humanity. Why do they then not choose to undo capitalism and instead maybe choose to perpetuate these cycles? And the reason is, it's because of trauma, because capitalism is trauma. This belief that there's not enough for me, and so I need to keep producing in order to feel like there's enough, is a survival thing, right? And when it comes to survival, if we're not feeling any sense of control over our survival, then our body goes into a fight or flight response, right? Which is a healthy and normal response. We are descendants of people pre-civilization who only knew how to fight or flight. That's the reason why they survived as humans, is because they were in fight or flight. So it's a very healthy thing, but it becomes unhealthy when we are constantly in fight or flight. So the reason why people are not able to say, okay, I'm doing anti-oppressive work is because oftentimes the body is the one that overrides our cognition, because this is the hand brain model. And this is our cognitive brain, okay? It covers the amygdala, which is the thing that sends the signal to our body to fight or flight. And it is governed by the reptilian brain, which is this brain stem. So if you imagine your brain like this on the side of your head, at the back here is the reptilian brain. And so when the reptilian brain is going ding, 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 there's a threat to our safety, whether that's capitalism, not enough money, no food on the table, that's going to activate our fight or flight response. And what happens is when this thing is inflamed and this thing's going off, our cognitive brain goes offline. We flip our lid. And so there is actually no rational cognitive choice here when we're in fight or flight. And so our society, those of us that are choosing, right, for maybe lack of a better word, is that they actually have no choice. There's no cognitive choice. All they know is fight or flight. I need to keep doing this because this is all I know that is safe. This is all I understand in order for me to survive. And so how do we then begin to create the capacity in order to then start doing anti-oppressive work? We need to learn how to meet our trauma. Yes, how do we disrupt that? How do we heal? We need to understand how trauma shows up in our body. And we need to be able to work with fight or flight responses. And by understanding, and it's also fight, flight, or fawn, which is pretty much what colonization did to our ancestors, was this deep fawning response, which is basically like people pleasing, of like, you are a threat to my safety. And so in order for me to feel safe, I'm going to do everything that you asked me to do. This is a fawning response, right? So that is also a trauma response. When we can understand when we're fight, flight, or fawning, we can, like, you know, in the breathing practice, or like, even though these things are automatic, when we turn towards them, when we can name them, when we can say, this is what's happening, we have a choice. There's some agency that comes online. And oftentimes, you know, if we're in the beginning, it might feel actually really like, oh shit, I'm in a flight response, and we might pop out. We might ding again, right? Our cognition might go offline, and then we end up, you know, maybe moving through a spiral, which is okay. That was me a lot when I first started. But over time, as I built my capacity through resourcing, and which is what we've been talking about today, right? By building my momentum of health, I'm so much better able to name, oh my goodness, this is what anxiety looks like. Okay, I'm feeling anxious. What are my choices here? Can I ground? Can I drink some water? Can I distract myself? And so by creating this capacity to meet our trauma, eventually over time, when we do feel a trauma response kicks in, we're actually able to complete it or meet it, and so that our cognition can come back online, and then we can make choices. And this happens little by little over time, because we've been living our whole life, right, in this kind of like pattern. And so it really takes us starting small, doable actions that keep us connected to health, that doesn't put us out of our window of tolerance or capacity, and that brings us back to our bodies so that we can have choice and agency over how we're showing up. Yeah, was that helpful? I'm gonna wait for some responses here. How did it land for you all? Yeah, helpful. Okay, good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, y'all, trauma, like understanding trauma was a like literal life changer for me. Yeah, yeah, and I trust that, you know, this information will land in its own time, in its own way. Oftentimes we need repetition to really embody something, to understand something, which is why I sadly don't really like, I feel like our education system with like one semester of one subject, like we cannot expect people to really embody and understand something unless it's, like you said, we sit with it for a while. We sit with it in our bodies and like really understand theories and concepts and ideas in order for us to embody it, in order for us to really understand. Our body processes information 8 times slower than our brain does. Our brains are amazing. But the truth is, our body governs so much of our decisions and our actions, and the more and that's part of the reason why I think oppression has thrived for so long, because we're all like, not we're all, I mean majority of folks are dissociated from their body. We're all up here, right? We're mostly, when I say we, I mean like collectively, we're all dissociated from the body. And so that's why somatic work, embodiment work, yoga, anything that brings you into the body is so powerful. Because when we come into our body, we reclaim our power. We reclaim our sense of self, our agency, our sovereignty, and we're no longer just moving from what we think is right, which oftentimes is conditioning. Yeah. So just kind of moving a little bit along so that I can offer you the actual practice of somatic resourcing. Basic needs, right? Enough sleep, food, community care, resting when you feel tired as much as you need to, and creating a routine for self-care. And it starts small, truly. My self-care routine, believe it or not, is like 15 to 30 minutes of yoga and then 15 minutes of journaling every single day. And it seems like so small, especially for the depth of work that I do. But because I do it every day and consistently, it makes the biggest difference. Rather than doing it one time, like 3 hours of it one time every once in a while, I do 45 minutes to an hour a day of my self-care practices every single day. And that has made the hugest difference. And somatic resourcing is really working with the level of the body, right? So some of these like basic needs, of course, it's caring for the body, but I think somatic resourcing takes us one level deeper. So going to yoga class, which some of us here do already, which is amazing. Going out to nature, and really like enjoying and like being engaged with the senses of nature. Like don't go out to nature and like be on your phone all day, like, you know, and like took a selfie, I'm out of nature, okay, all good, right? That's okay if you've done that. I definitely have done that. And it's a practice for me, even when I'm out in nature, to really just like use my senses to take in. And the reason why I say senses all the time is because sensory information, our five senses giving information to our brain, is what tells us we're here and now and we're safe. That's how we engage with the body, is using our senses, right? Whether externally or internally. So noticing what we sense inside of our body, which is what we'll do in a moment here. Working with your well ancestors, right? Calling them in and like relating to them at the level of the body, which again, we'll do in a moment here. You'll pick one of these things, but I'll teach you how to do it so that you can do it on your own in different ways. Rituals. So one of my favorite rituals is lighting a candle every morning and pulling an oracle card, just for like guidance for the day. And it's just like such a really great way to connect to my intuition, connect to a more divine part of myself. Breathing. So I'm not sure if any of you tried breathwork before. It can, I highly recommend a trauma-informed practitioner for breathwork, because it can be really activating if the practitioner is not trauma-informed. Or Reiki. So Reiki is like an energy massage, essentially. And actually, if you're local in San Diego, which I think some of you are, this Sunday there's a BIPOC community clinic in Balboa Park, where there are donation-based sessions for acupuncture, craniosacral, fire cupping, Reiki. And so if you want info on that, please let me know. I help with the schedule, so I'll book you right in. But it's once a month, and it's donation based. It's super accessible to the community, and it's available to all Black and Indigenous people of color. Okay, so let's do it. Let's do the practice so that you know what it kind of like looks and feels like, and you can do that with any other resource. But before that, I'm gonna pause and see if you have any questions before we do this, and then we'll share again once more. Actually, let's do the practice first, and then we'll just do like one closing, we'll do questions and then a closing share. Okay. So go ahead and get comfortable. And I know we just talked about a lot, so maybe you might be feeling some energy in your body. Maybe there's some activation. And I wonder if slowing it down a little bit, and I'm going to do this with you, I can feel some speed in my body. I'm just going to take a few deep breaths. I'm going to lean into my chair because that's going to help me engage my back body. I'm just going to do some deep belly breathing for a few moments here, and you're welcome to join me. I'd love to invite you to do that, to consider doing that. And that sometimes I find it helpful to place a hand on my belly and feel the breath going down there. If you're feeling a bit activated, extending the exhale, so making the exhale longer than the inhale, can help to down regulate your nervous system. Or if you're feeling a little bit more collapsed or not as here, deepening the inhale, that can help up regulate your nervous system. Also, adding a vibration at the back of your neck when you exhale, so like this. That activates your vagus nerve, which also regulates your nervous system. I know it sounds really weird. It sounds very primal too, which might indicate why it helps with the nervous system, because it's reptilian, it's primal, it's body, animal body. So I'd love to invite you to consider something that you know is really supportive for you, something that helps you feel grounded or stable, perhaps something that helps you feel alive or connected. And it can be something in nature, so maybe the ocean or one of your favorite trees, maybe a backyard in a home that you grew up in, maybe a park. It can also be an object, or it can also be a person, alive or passed on. If you work with angels or celestial bodies, it can also be that. It can be really simple as well, like your favorite color, your favorite blanket. It can also be an animal. So really the possibilities are endless, but just pick one for now. And so this is something, for example, you could also pick like your yoga practice, right? So it can be something that you do while you're practicing yoga, or if you need to feel this sense of being resourced, you can pick something like that. Anything really. And so I'm gonna pick this tree that I sit under in Mission Bay Park pretty much at least once a week. I go there, but I'm not there right now. And so this is what my resourcing practice looks like if I need the support of the tree, but it's not physically with me. And so once you pick your thing, just take a moment to visualize being in presence with this object or person or being. I'm just going to shorthand it as your resource. So whatever your resource is, just take a moment to visualize being in the space where your resource is or your resource is with you. And as you attune to and visualize your resource, what are some of the qualities of your resource that you feel really connected to, that makes it a resource for you? So for example, my tree, I love how big she is. And it gives me this idea that she has wisdom, that there's this eternal, like, wisdom and how deep her roots must be. Even though I can't see them, how deep and wide and huge her roots must be for her to be that big. And so rooted, wise, connected. So these are some of the qualities that I feel when I'm thinking of my tree right now. And other days is different, but today that's what it is. And so I wonder, as you name these qualities, if you could almost feel like you were either becoming one with the qualities of your resource, or if your resource is a human or a thing, an object, where these qualities land in your body. So for example, I'm thinking of wisdom, right? That quality of the tree. And I think of wisdom that's not seen. So I'm allowing that quality to land at the level of my body. From here, just what you can do is notice how this quality feels like for you when you attune to and connect with this quality. So it's okay if you don't feel anything. Know that just the intention, the curiosity is doing it. So maybe interoception, which is the muscle of feeling internally, isn't as strong yet. And that's what it is, right? It's a muscle. So you get to practice and strengthen the muscle. Just like your intuition, it's also a muscle. Just beginning to imagine, what would it feel like if you don't feel anything tangible? Maybe imagining, what would it feel like for me to have wisdom that's not seen, but is there? And as I tune to that, what I notice is a softening in my lower body. Like I can feel like a heaviness going down, down, down from my waist downwards. I feel like I could meet any challenges as it arrives, and even though I don't feel it, there's just this knowing that shows up for me when I drop down to my body. That I'm stronger than how I might look on the outside. Just like my tree. So we'll just take a few moments here to allow for that quality to maybe find a home in the body. Maybe it's really obvious to you where it lives, or maybe you want to choose a place for it to live. Maybe somewhere that might feel tender or alive. Yeah, beautiful. And so just slowly just coming back to here and now, know that this practice you can take home with you. You can do it at any time, even if it's like 2 minutes of attuning to your resource. It's beautiful, and it's that small and doable, right? That creates the possibility of it being integrated. And so gently coming back, looking around the space. That took a little bit longer than I was expecting. So it is 3:30. If you need to hop off, please feel free to do so. But if you have time, I'd love to hear what's alive for you. I'm going to pause and stop the recording now so that if you want, you can unmute yourself to share or drop in the chat. And if you have to leave, I totally understand. Back and say goodbye. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed the session today. Next week, we'll talk about trauma responses, and we'll do the resourcing practice at the beginning. so that you feel like you can integrate it. So it looks like someone hopped in. That's weird.
Yeah, let's just put them in the waiting room.
Okay, is it for a different meeting?
It must be. I don't know how they would have this link though.
I think their name was in that
Oh, okay.
email, so maybe they're hopping in a bit late. So we can let them know.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop the recording. See you next week. Hopefully you come by. Take care.
Thank you.